If people at the back could come take a seat, we're going to get started pretty soon. I'll call you up. Okay, if everyone's finding their seat. There are also seats, 3 seats up here in the front. For anyone who uses the microphone tonight, our heating system in James Chapel is not working, so we have heaters in the basement that are blowing heat up here through very loud fans in the back. So you have to be close to the microphone so people can hear. I'm demonstrating. Please come grab a seat. Here's 3 seats right here up front. Okay. I'm Serene Jones, and it's my great honor to welcome all of you to Union Theological Seminary and this place, which is called James Chapel. As is a tradition at Union, we start by acknowledging the land on which we are. Union Theological Seminary acknowledges and honors the land on which this building stands as the homeland and territory of the Lenape people, as well as the habitat and dwelling place of the many beings they have been in relationship with. We give thanks to all the spirits of nature. We pay respect to Lenape peoples, past, present, and future, and we express support for the flourishing of indigenous peoples and lifeways within this place and everywhere. So I'm very happy to welcome you this evening to Union's 6th annual James Cone Lecture, instituted in honor of the Reverend Dr. James H. Cone, the founder of Black Liberation Theology. This annual, yes, great applause is due. This annual lecture continues Dr. Cone's dynamic legacy of prophetic Black theological and religious thought. We are excited to continue this lecture series in honor of Dr. Cone, and each year we bring scholars, theologians, and bring them together with the Union community to engage in critical dialogue about the ongoing struggle for justice and freedom in America and beyond. I want to take a brief moment here to thank the incredible planning committee that worked to ensure the success of today's event, led by our wonderful faculty, the Reverend Dr. Andrea White, the Reverend Dr. Gary Dorian, Dr. Cornell West. So I want you to join me in saying thank you to the 3 of them. What a crew, huh? So at the end of the keynote address, we will have time for questions and answers. And For our online viewers and also for people in this room, you will see signs up on the pillars that tell you the website to log on to and the code, and then your question will appear up here, and Reverend Dr. Andrea White will monitor the questions and as they come in and ask them. So before I introduce Dr. Carter, which I'm very delighted to do, I would like to pause and invite Matthew Baker, who is the head of the Burke Library, and he's going to talk to us about the Cone Archive.
Thanks, President Jones, and thank you for just a moment in this important evening to share with you some information that I think will be of interest to this group. Some of you may know that when Dr. Cone passed away in 2018, he arranged for his archival papers to be transferred to the Burke Library here at Union. We have been working on those ever since. Little interruption with some pandemic slowdowns, but I'm happy to say that as of this week, all the work involved in processing and making those archives available is completed. So that's about 75 boxes worth of papers, notes, clippings. And there are a few people here who have really given profoundly of their time and talents to bring this about. Just a tremendous amount of love and labor to ensure that Dr. Cone's papers are preserved and available to scholars, researchers, going forward. So the first person that I would like to acknowledge is Leah Edelman, who is sitting back there at the table. Leah is the Burke's archivist, and Leah has spent years of her time and talents working through these 75 boxes to ensure that they are preserved, well organized, that scholars and students can understand what's there and access it for whatever reason. So Leah has really done a tremendous service to Dr. Cone's legacy as an archivist. Also, several, Prince Aqua, where are you, Prince? There you are. Some of you will know Prince. Prince also did a tremendous amount of work. There's a number of materials that were digitized, hundreds of items that Prince really played an important part in. Taylor Baker, is a colleague from Columbia Libraries who spent months and months making sure that the digitized materials are findable, so when you Google things or when you're looking online, you can find them. And Mason Golden, I don't know if Mason made it here. Oh, there, Mason. Hi, Mason. Mason cataloged the 1,100 books, each one of Dr. Cone's heavily annotated books, which are in the James Cone Research Library on the second floor. So please come and have a look. It's a wonderful testimony to Dr. Cone's reading and research and study and so on. Anyway, thank you very much for this opportunity to let everybody know, and we hope we'll hear from you and come use and study and work with these archives.
It's very exciting news, and when the lecture is over, when we move to the reception, I encourage you to take a look at some of the archival material that is at the table at the back. It was quite a work of love and a feat of nature to catalog and organize the massive amount of material that was very well organized by Dr. Cone. Thank you, Matthew, for the care that you have put into this from the day you began the work on it. So thank you. Okay. I'm now going to introduce our speaker. Tonight, we are going to hear from J. Kameron Carter, who is a professor of African American Studies, Comparative Literature, and Religious Studies at the University of California, Irvine. Professor Carter's scholarship and teaching is presently examining questions of race and ecology, or where the social and the environmental meet, using the lens of religion, literature, political theory, and philosophy. A very wide-ranging thinker. These areas of study hold together for him under the rubric that defines his broader corpus of work as well as political theology. He is an amazing author. He's author of Race, a Theological Account in 2008. The editor of Religion and the Futures of Blackness in 2013. Editor of The Matter of Black Religion in 2021. And most recently published, he is the author of The Anarchy of Black Religion, a Mystic Song in 2023. His latest book, The Afterlife of Christian Empire and Apocalypse, is in production with Yale University Press at this very moment and will be published in 2027. And finally, he is the editor of, very important for tonight's conversation, the editor of an essential book for teaching, in particular teaching James Cone, and that is the book, God is Black, The Essential James Cone. It's with Orbis Press, and its anticipated publication is also in 2027. So tonight, his lecture, such a great title, Conjuring Cone, Black Theology at the Crossroads, promises to be engaging and thought-provoking, as is all of the work that Professor Carter has done across the decades. I'm very delighted to welcome him to the stage as this year's keynote address for the 6th annual James Cone Lecture at Union. Come on up.
Good evening, everyone. Am I close enough to the mic? I want to be sensitive to everything that President Jones said for making sure everyone can hear me well. Okay, great. I see some heads nodding in the back. Okay, great. I just want to start by expressing my gratitude for being here. I said this meeting with students earlier. This is just such an honor, and I actually struggle a bit to find words to express the depth of my gratitude. Not just to be back at the Union Theological Seminary community, but for the occasion for which I am here in honor of a great thinker, a great person, a great man, a great human being, Dr. Cone. I don't take lightly standing here in this honor, and it's my hope and my prayer that I will be able to offer some thoughts around Professor Cone that really do lift him up and lift up what he represents for all of us, not just this community. Given that, I'm going to dive right in because I want to do the absolute best I can to get through this material. And so let me begin. I want to begin with a claim that is about this lecture and also bigger than it. That claim is this: James Cone, whose name is inseparable from this institution, Union Theological Seminary, has yet to be fully read. Well known though he is, certainly within the halls of Christian studies and the corridors of theological inquiry, to say nothing of the passageways of Black religious studies and increasingly Black studies as such, his life as embedded in his times, and more specifically still his life as a function of the general question of Black study and the meaning of Black life in the context and in the face of the strange meaning of religion in the 20th and now the 21st century. His life, he as a person, has yet to be fully, and I mean deeply, read. I mean not just his approach to the field of study and practice called theology, but his life. This lecture announces the beginning of my efforts at just such a reading that situates Cone not so much, as the hymn puts it, near the cross, but at the crossroads. Call this a gesture towards biography, if you like, and you wouldn't be wrong. But I'd quickly add that it will not be biography in the conventional sense. It's not the story of James Cone within the frame of late 20th century and early 21st century liberal Protestantism. It is not James Cone within the frame, shall we say, of the social gospel with black religion now placed at the center, or even within the intramurals of the theological or religious studies debates that we see carried on at the American Academy of Religion. Instead, I want to ask some other questions. What does James Cone, now amongst the ancestors, as one of Afro-diasporic people's most grand soloists, mean in this moment of the implosion of the empire of Western modernity? From the shores of these United States to those of Europe, and dare I say, yes, I will say, to that outpost of Western power in the Middle East, the modern nation state of Israel. What lens do we bring to bear on his life and his times, on his intellectual project in these fraught times? I want to begin the task of more deeply clarifying these questions. We'll see about what answers I produce, because I'm actually more invested in trying to get our question straight. Not by standing over Cone, but by conjuring him, conjuring through him and beyond him toward that black universe. Such conjuring is necessarily unstately. It is wayward and disobedient to the imaginary of the state, to the fusion of God and power, to the imaginary of God as sovereign power. In short, it is to think from the threshold, from a crossroads that is anterior to and exceeds the frame of political theology as such. I conjure Cone towards these ends. Hence the title of this 2026 James Cone lecture, Conjuring Cone. So let me begin with the first move. What's in a title? In another place, I make an argument that the entire arc of Cone's intellectual itinerary is compressed into the first 4 of his books. The many other books, essays, articles, and interviews, all the way through the last book, Said I Wasn't Going to Tell Nobody, elaborate the project laid out in the first 4 books. In short, the project is in the first 4 books. I won't defend that claim here, since I develop it substantively in the opening essay of the forthcoming Cone reader that I'm editing and that Orbis Press will be publishing next year under the title, God is Black, the Essential James Cone. Instead, what I want to do here is something more precise, something more targeted. I ask you to consider with me the titles of those first 4 books. What's in the titles? And how do they clue us in on the project, and shall we say, the project that exceeds the project? Let's begin with the first book, Black Theology and Black Power, 1969, the project's founding provocation to fuse theology with what was seen at that time from the perspective of the political establishment as the most urgent and dangerous political formation of that moment, the Black Power movement. In the title and the book, these 2 formations and discourses are made to speak to each other. The 2 are shown to require each other. Again, it's 1969, a year after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, but it's also the year Cone joined the faculty of Union Theological Seminary as an assistant professor of systematic theology. Now, Cone is in New York City, far away from home, far away from Bearden, Arkansas, where Lucy and Charlie Cone raised and schooled a young Jim in the ways of America, indeed in the ways of this world. Far from home, but not far from that upbringing. No longer down south, he's now what I call up south. While 1 year later, within 1 year, came the next book, A Black Theology of Liberation. We are still on the terrain of theology, the discursive meeting point of God and power, the site of the meaning of the divine where power itself is in question, and because it's in question, always in need of reestablishing its divine backing. What sets this second book apart from the first is that it dares to put into a systematic form of thought precisely this fusion of black theology and black power. The result? A systematic black theology of liberation. Now, let me be clear here. There is a radical audacity already in what Cone has done in the first two books. For what's emerging is a system of thought, a systematic theology that aims to redirect the historical and intellectual trajectory of the political, theological, the philosophical, theological, the ethical, theological machinery, the systems that anchored the West in the era that the influential mid-20th century journalist and philanthropist Henry Luce called the American century. But these were also the fraught years of the post-World War II, the post-Six Days War that saw the Israeli settler conquest of Gaza and Palestine, the years of the U.S. quagmire in Vietnam. And as the first book indicates, they were the post-King days of black power. Cone unapologetically systematized in the major doctrines of the Christian faith the notion that the God of the Bible is the God who liberates the oppressed. Now, let's pause and take stock of what's emerging here. Cone's first two books are unprecedented in the history of American theology, and arguably in the theology of modernity writ large. They invert what Cedric Robinson, in his political science dissertation, defended in the same year, 1970, as Cone's, just as Cone's Black Theology of Liberation is being published, what Robinson called the terms of order, and what I would extend to call the terms of political theological order, or the terms of sovereignty, what classical Christian theology has called the Ordo Salutis, the terms of the economy of salvation. Cone's first two books take the sovereignty structure that Western theology placed in the service of power and turns that sovereignty structure, the sovereignty of God, decisively, unflinchingly, daringly towards the oppressed and the dispossessed. Therein lies the significance of the first two books. They do not displace theology, they invert it. The God of classical Christian thought is a sovereign, the sovereign, who takes the real as material data, splits the real between the properly true, good, and beautiful, and the contingently so, and decides between being, and non-being. The decision is towards salvation, who will get it, or not. More still, the salvation decision runs along the fault line of life and death, which NYU's Denise Ferreira de Silva demonstrates across her two major works in her own way, extending Frantz Fanon, that fault line of life and death is a racially gendered fault line whereby some are aligned with life and others with death. Without naming it as such, Ferreira de Silva is contending with what I'm calling the general structure of theological decision. Philosophical decision is but a variant of this theological decision. Cone's 1969 book with Cone's 1970 book represent an intervention to invert this very structure of theological decision so that the decision now falls on the side of the oppressed, not the oppressor. He transforms the content of theological decision, even if the structure of decision remains, but now for the oppressed. There's more to be said on this point, but before getting there, let's consider Cone's third book, the third book, The Spirituals and the Blues, 1972. What's in the title? Or rather, what's not in that title, especially compared to the first two? The word theology does not appear. Liberation does not appear. God does not appear. Indeed, there's nothing that would indicate, at least at the level of the title, that we are in the domain of theology. Instead, the title registers not theology, but two forms of black culture, two forms of black sound. I'm gonna come back to this, stay with me. But first, finally, the fourth book, 1975, God of the Oppressed. The architecture of a theological project reaches its deepest moment in this book. Cone continues to theologically systematize liberation, but if the earlier books do it by re-signifying God, pause real quick, remember in these two books, he gives us that phrase, God is black. He re-signifies the meaning of God. In the fourth book, he's going to signify upon Jesus himself. He says in the book, Jesus is who he was. He was a Palestinian. I might annotate that. He was an Afro-Arab Jew. Jesus is who he is. Jesus is black. He is in the current existential conjuncture of black life. And lastly, eschatologically, Jesus is who he will be or become. Here we have the moment in which Jesus is sheer openness. Cedric Marmison might say he's the incomplete totality. What I want you to notice is what has happened in the sequence of Cone's first four books. Staying for now at the level of the titles in his effort to build the thing called black theology. The sequence is book 1, theology. Book 2, theology deepened. Book 3, a curiosity, theology adjacent, shall we say. Something anterior to theology, adjacent to it, it's an oddity. Then it's neither inside theology nor outside of it. It is out from even the inside-outside dynamic that would structure theological decision. We might call it not anti, being precise with my words, A-N-T-E, anti-theology. The third book, then, at the titular level, is a break. It is fugitively, Fred Moulton might say, in the break of theology. It breaks it, it's cutting it, it crosses it, it's even stammering through its own theological progression to the fourth book. Cone's third book marks not the cross, but it's at a crossroads. Okay, stay with me. He puts black theology's own development. Book 1, theology. Book 2, deep in theology. Here's the break. Then he's going to get to book 4, where he culminates the theological move. But the third move is going to cross. Something happens in that third move. There's something both theological, but more than theological happening in this progression. The more than is to let black cultural production, in this case, the sound of the spirituals and the blues, to organize the inquiry rather than simply theological category organize the inquiry. That's the potential housed in the third book. This, I want to say clearly, is a genuinely radical move. And it is not one that theological sequentiality, theological linear progression can simply metabolize and continue. And so, next move. This section is titled, Beloved's Bluestone Blues. I can't tell y'all how quickly this dropped on me when I was working this. It's hit me all in a moment. I said, okay, I gotta write this before I forget it. Here we go. Consider with me for a moment Toni Morrison's Bluestone Blues to clarify what I'm getting at. In her blessedly beloved book, Beloved, Morrison gives us the haunted home on Bluestone Road. She gives it the number, address, 124. She doesn't call it 123 Bluestone. It's 124. The gap in the sequence is not an error. Instead, Morrison is telling us something by signifying through broken sequence. The novel's operations, its imaginary, are in the break of broken sequence. Meaning is in, or rather, meaning is numerological rupture. 1, 2, 4. This is the sign of what cannot be contained in normal and normative counting, in ordinary sequential progression. Charles Long, about whom I say more in a moment, gives us a word for this. He calls it ellipsis, the dot, dot, dot that signals the unsayable, the incompletable, the veritable exhaustion of words and discourse. In Morrison's case, the broken sequence registers the returning, unresolved flesh and blood force of what the living try to leave behind but simply can't. Broken numerology, sequentiality, ruptured, failed progression. This performs the haunting at the level of address, speech, and at the level of address, the address of the house on Bluestone Road, before the haunting of the baby child even begins. That's Beloved, the name of the child who lives on even in death. But that's also Beloved, the novel itself, which is, Morrison tells us, not a story to pass on. And that in not passing on the story of slavery, the story of broken kinship, it in fact passes on another knowledge, and other, capital O, knowledge, and other, again, capital O, way of knowing. Morrison calls this other knowing and knowledge, quote unquote, rememory. The rememory of the violences of slavery, including lynching and the Middle Passage, so as to remember a people. Broken sequence, time broken, time according to another beat, in the downbeat. The absent 3 is the downbeat. It's a musical space where something else is happening. This is not merely about time or space even. It's about space-time in that quantum and astrophysics type of way. It encodes a different understanding of the sacred in the breakdown of Western time, and yet in the nick of time. Let's call it a poetics of the sacred. The blues riding on what theological sequentiality cannot metabolize. I argue here that Cone's first 4 books work something like this. The Theological Project is book 1. The Theological Project advances, it's book 2. Then the queerly strange book 3, The Spirituals in the Blues. And then the theological project continues, book 4, 1, 2, 4. The project tries to move through the third book, the book of black culture, and then settle back into normative theological foundations and sequentiality. But what happens when one, in fact, enters that book? So now I'm going to take us inside the book for a second. Upon entry, one sees that against the grain of what the title potentiates, Cone converts the spirituals into something properly theological and then mines the blues as data for theology. Okay, stay with me. He has the blues speak a doctrine of God, a doctrine of Christ, a doctrine of redemption, then a doctrine of Christian eschatology. They thus become secular spirituals. To quote him, theology clothed in the profane dress. Notwithstanding this, the blues themselves won't stay put. They do not quite settle into the theological resting place Cone assigns them. Instead, like Morrison's 1, 2, 4, which scholar of religion and literary critic Amber Lowe argues, thinking between Morrison and Octavia Butler, 1, 2, 4 is the elliptical numerology of a black feminist cosmology. Cone's third book is also, like Morrison's book, haunted. It haunts. It carries a haunting. What I'm doing here is conjuring Cone by conjuring with him in the break of his haunted third book, which haunts not just theology as such, but even the Black Theology Project. The third book opens something that exceeds theology's formal frame as such, most especially the anti-blackness that rides on the coattails of theology as a discursive frame of the modern world. That excess registers a cosmological reach that plays out, that sounds itself out in black sound, in black performance. As a poetics of the sacred, this is also a sonics then of the sacred. In black sound, in black sonic performance, in black oral culture, there is this strange sound for and toward and otherwise sacred, a fugitive, shall we say, sacred. Following Saidiya Hartman, who's thinking in the wake of Frederick Douglass's 1845 narrative, Fred Moten called this the maternity of Aunt Hester's scream. Reggie Williams has been thinking about this through the queer sonic sacrality indexed in the haptic touch and the interlaced fingers of Aretha Franklin and James Cleveland as Aretha sang Amazing Grace in 1972 at LA's New Temple Missionary Baptist Church. In fact, if you really want to know what I'm talking about, all you have to do is listen to Prince's legendary 2004 guitar solo, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, at the 19th Annual Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In fact, my plan was actually, if I had the visuals and everything set up, to play the YouTube so you can see what I'm talking about. But if you listen to that song and you listen to what he does with that guitar at the end, and then he throws the guitar in the air, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And I assumed I could play it, so this sentence assumes I was playing it. Okay. So what you just heard, or what you just heard me describe, what you just heard is not virtuosity for its own sake. It is a man at the crossroads. I'm suggesting that in that very moment, we need to hear Prince as a blues player. He's at the crossroads. Is a man at the crossroads, bending sound until it says something theology cannot on its own terms say. Namely, that the body, at the limit of what the body can bear, generates from itself something sacred. Not because God decreed it as sacred, but because flesh in its most ungovernable form insists on itself. What I'm talking about is black life insisting on itself. That's what rides on the blues. And it's precisely what theological sequentiality cannot metabolize. That's the potential housed in the third book's title, The Spirituals and the Blues, even if the content of the book strains in its reach for what the title is beckoning. It is a potential that cannot theologically resolve into the fourth book, God of the Oppressed, the book that returns formally to theology. As an aside, I actually think that God of the Oppressed is Cone's most Bardian book, but we can have that debate. And because, to continue here, and because it can't be resolved back into theology as such, even into black theology as such, just like Beloved, the blues keep returning. I don't mean this metaphorically. The blues and the question of its status literally returns 40 years later in Cone's penultimate, next to the last book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Cone's penultimate and arguably most mature book, his deepest reckoning with what the third book materialized in the project could not fully hold, but it kept haunting. The haunted book is The Spirituals and the Blues. The question is, what's doing the haunting? Okay, next move. This section is called A Blue, then I have a parenthetical S. A blues orientation. Okay. The answer, what's doing the haunting, at least the beginning of an answer, is something another great thinker of religion generally and black religion and culture specifically was pointing to. That other great thinker is Charles Long. Long is another one of the presiding spirits, I would suggest, of this occasion. He and Cone met in and came out of the intellectual ferment of Chicagoland. Long was at the University of Chicago Divinity School when Cone was completing his work at Northwestern University in connection with Garrett Evangelical Divinity School, Theological Seminary, where Cone obtained his PhD in 1965. Long received his PhD from the University of Chicago Divinity School 3 years earlier in 1962, and later became professor in the history of religions at the University of Chicago. Eventually, Long started leaning on Cone, pressing Cone, in print and in conversation, with a provocation that is simple to state, but far from simple to absorb. Long's provocation: the protocols of theological discourse cannot carry the full weight. It can carry some of the water, but not the full weight of black religio-cultural experience. And if that is the case, now, Dr. Cone, what does that mean for your emerging black theology project? This was Long's charge and claim. The blues, the trickster, the conjure tradition, the ring shout, the layered cosmological inheritances of the African diaspora. These are not raw material for theology. They are not stones to be quarried and built into a theological edifice. They are forms of orientation toward ultimate reality in their own right, with their own logic, with their own epistemology, with their own cosmological grammar. And that grammar exceeds what theology can hold without distorting it. Long's word for this, he came up with a word for this. He called it orientation. For Charles Long, religion at its most fundamental is neither doctrine, belief, nor propositional content. Religion is a way a people situates itself in the cosmos after everything else has been taken. After land has been taken, language taken, kinship, the gods of the homeland have been stripped away, and a people finds itself stripped bare in a world organized for its destruction. The enslaved did not receive that world, though, passively. They oriented themselves within it. They found in black sound, in the field holler, the spiritual, the blues, a way of inhabiting a universe arranged against them. That is not simply theology, it is cosmology. And the difference matters. The spirituals in the blues is Cone's effort to follow, if not all the way, Long's provocation. I'm trying to give you an account of the blip. The title says so. The skip in the sequence says so. Theology, book 1. Theology, book 2. Then the blues, cosmological soundings in book 3. And then back to theology, explicitly, book 4. And yet in book 3, there is this tension in how to interpret black cultural productions, in this case, music. How to understand the transcendence that the music registers. Is it transcendence of a Christian theological order, or is it not so much a Christian theological order, even if it can pass through Christian thought and practice, but rather, what if it's cosmological? The question is, what do the spirituals and the blues register? Cone notes that to interpret the music, and this is a quote, academic tools. This goes to some of that conversation we were having with the students here. You want to hear something. Cone notes that to interpret this music, academic tools, and presumably this includes the tools of theology as an epistemic thought form and a mode of meaning making, to continue the quote, he says, are not enough. This is Cone himself. He continues, quote, the interpreter must feel the spirit. That is, one must feel one's way into the power of black music, responding both to its rhythm and the faith and experience it affirms, end quote. Here, Cone turns to feeling as data for thought. The interpreter needs feel tools for this. Feel tools. To feel what? He says, quote, the spirit with a capital S. Cone capitalizes spirit, though the spiritual song he references does not. Quote, every time, this is the spiritual he's referencing, every time I feel the spirit moving in my heart, I will pray, end quote. What's at stake in the slippage from spirit, lowercase s in the hymn, to spirit, capital S in the interpretive reading? What if we refused a Christian interpretive decision and dwelled in the non-theological, para-religious indecision? And what if we did this in fidelity to what Cone says next? I quote him, this song invites the believer to move close to the very sources of black existence and to experience the black community's power to endure and the will to survive, end quote. Refusing to theologically decide that the spirit as source of black existence is the Christian spirit and dwelling precisely in that indecision helps us actually better hear the force of Cone's immediate invocation of something Amiri Baraka Leroy Jones says in his landmark book, Black Music. I quote, because Cone quoted Baraka. The God spoken about in black songs is not the same one as in the white songs. Though the words might look the same, Baraka continues, they are not even pronounced alike. There's God and there's God. But it is a different quality of energy that they summon. What does it mean to take energy as data for thought? What qualities do these energies summon? With Baraka in mind, Cone identifies 5 qualities of energy the music summons. 1, it summons non-individuation. Black music is unity music. Black folk are not in individuality, they are some sort of collective, some sort of community, some sort of commons. 2, It is functional in forging non-individuation or communal existence. Quoting him, black music is functional in this way. Third, black music, he says, registers, or this is my interpretation, I'm gonna give you the quote. Black music registers aliveness, black aliveness under conditions of death. Or as Cone says, quote, black music is a living reality, end quote, marked by the contradictions inherent in the black experience. Fourth, black music is both social and political. 4 moves, I said 5, here we go. But where does this accumulation of black musical and cultural meaning and performance all lead? Cone answers by stating the 5th and ultimate quality of the music. Quote, black music is theological. He then continues, quote, my purpose is to uncover the theological presuppositions of black music as reflected in the spirituals and the blues, asking, what do they tell us about black people's deepest aspirations and devotion? End quote. So, as Cone unfolds the book, black people's deepest aspirations and devotion become explainable through Christian theological meaning, a doctrine of God as liberator and of Jesus Christ as its mediator, a black theodicy. How can God be good in the face of black suffering is developed, and an eschatology of heaven beyond hell are mobilized to do the explaining work of black culture. Across 5 chapters that are the book's core, Cone sketches this out at the site of the spirituals. He spends the bulk of the book actually on the spirituals. The spirituals are Christian spirituals for him. The final chapter, called The Blues, a secular spiritual, carries forward this theological content within the spirituals into the secular mode of the blues. Like the spirituals, the blues find their resting place in theology. So that's what happens when we get inside the book. And then I turn around and ask a question. So let me back up and read the sentence so you can get the question. Like the spirituals, the blues find their resting place in theology. Or do they? 40 years later, in The Cross and the Lynching Tree, written against the backdrop of the Obama presidency, when black life, or shall I say, a certain kind of black life, listen, I love Obama, but I gotta critique y'all, so y'all hearing it, okay? Don't throw tomatoes at me. A certain kind of black life was being fused with the American empire. And also, when Donald Trump was beginning to position himself politically for what we now know was to come, Cone still found himself contending in that moment against that backdrop with the blues, and thus with the question of what is distinctive about black culture. What does black culture put in play in the face of empire? That's where I'm going with these questions. I want to isolate one moment in The Cross and the Lynching Tree when the ambiguity or the less than complete fit between black cultural form and theological form is pushed to the breaking point. We glimpse Cone in intellectual contact with the sheer excess, the absolute ecstasy of black culture. The moment is when poet Langston Hughes shows up with his blues poem, Goodbye Christ. Cone quotes the poem at length. I'll just quote you a piece of it. Goodbye, Christ Jesus, Lord God, Jehovah. Beat it on away from here now. Make way for a new guy with no religion at all. The real guy named Marx, communist, Lenin, peasant, Stalin, worker, me. I said me. End quote, the Hughes poem. Hughes is not arguing here for atheism. He is standing at the crossroads. Watch my time. Okay. He is standing at the crossroads and clearing it. He is refusing every sovereign figure, every secular and divine figure who has tried to occupy the junction where black life has to be lived. The blues poet sweeps the crossroads clean, not to leave a vacuum, but to make room for what I'm calling the in-sovereign rather than the sovereign. The in-sovereign sacred, for what cannot be possessed or decreed. Cone hears this. He feels it. In fact, as a part of feeling it, he attempts a new reckoning with Dolores Williams's insistence in Sisters in the Wilderness that you cannot find liberation in the mechanics of a lynching cross, which is to say, the lynching, which is to say, in the cross. She displaces Exodus with Hagar, liberation with survival, the sovereign God with the God who witnesses in the wilderness without guaranteeing the way through. She points, without quite naming it, towards the crossroads. And yet Cone, who sees exactly what Williams is doing and honors her for it, does not follow her direction. The theology of blood redemption prevails. The cross of the title does not accede to the crossroads. The ambivalence at work here, I suggest, is in fact the mark of an... Some people want to read stuff like this and think it's a failing. I can tell y'all right now, I'm not doing that. And here's what I'm going to do. The ambivalence at work here, I suggest, is in fact the mark of an ancestor worth conjuring with and worth conjuring. To conjure Cone and conjure with him is not to stand over him from some position of later and therefore supposedly superior vantage. It is to call forth what is latent in the moves he's trying to make, to find in the very place where his theological form could no longer carry him the outline of that for which he was reaching. What's he reaching for? What we are here to do tonight in this house is to follow the reach all the way, or at least as far as we can. In doing that, I want to consider one other contemporary of the early Cone who was also working out an interpretation of the blues and related black diasporic art forms. She was doing something adjacent across the same decade that Cone was writing his opening 4 books. I have found no evidence that Cone was in conversation with her. She was asking, though, questions like him. She was asking, what did black people make of a world organized for their destruction? What crossed the Middle Passage? What is the cosmological force of black sound and, by extension, Afro-diasporic culture? But she was not working in the form of Christian theology, liberation or otherwise, to do it. One way to put it is that she was working in the form of cultural theory and intellectual history. And that's not wrong. It's not a wrong way to put it. But as I see it, she was actually working in a form that was what I call transdisciplinary. It was functioning on the other side of modern disciplinary forms of knowledge and knowing. She was working poetically, carrying out what I call a poetics of the sacred. Her name is Sylvia Wynter. And because she was not inside theological form, the blues could be in her hands what in Cone's hand it kept threatening to be, sometimes getting there, never quite always fully managing to become what I call cosmologically dangerous. Not only white supremacy, though it includes that, not only to white supremacy, it includes that, not only to the whiteness of God, though it is that too, but dangerous to the very, not just political order, the cosmological order. I know my time is getting short, but I need to just take a pause because I can't stress this enough. In case I got to rush at the end, let me just go ahead and put my political punchline out there. We are in a moment that the political forms as we know them are exhausted. They're exhausted. America is all exhausted. We need another type of intervention at this point. And my move to the cosmological unapologetically is trying to do that. Our imaginations of cosmos, of world ordering, of worlding, in which we interpret the political is exhausted and it's collapsing. We are living in its obituary. right now. And what I think I see in Cone's work is an opening to reopen the cosmos question, not the theos question that has grounded this world, the cosmos question. Okay, in case I gotta rush, you got the punchline. All righty. Sit, take your time. Okay, what I want to consider is how Winter, writing in the very same decade in which Cone took up Long's challenge to think from Black cultural resources, handled this in her still unpublished 900-plus page manuscript titled Black Metamorphosis. She wrote it across the same decade in which Cone was writing his signature first 4 books. Black Metamorphosis. Sylvia Winter was not, as far as the record shows, in conversation with James Cone. She was writing across the same decade Cone was writing in his first 4 books, and in the same years Long was pressing his provocation. She was writing a manuscript that would eventually run to 935 pages. The great historian Vincent Harding of the Institute for the Black World would float a title to Winter for this massive manuscript that, again, to this point is unpublished. A copy of it is in the Schomburg Library. She would come to call it, following Harding's suggestion, Black Metamorphosis. Winter was asking, from Kingston, Jamaica, then to San Diego, then to Palo Alto. She was asking questions extremely adjacent to Cone's from New York. What did Black people make of a world organized to kill them? What crossed the Middle Passage? What is the cosmological force of Black sound? What does that cosmological force mean given the Christian theological architecture of this world, even when, most especially when, that architecture remains in force, though dressed up now in the garb of political rationality of nation states and the economic rationality of the markets? It is not that Winter is unaware of the force of the reigning political theological terms of order. Far from it. It's instead that she opts to execute a form of thinking that she will call and embrace as, I quote her, heretical and demonic. And also another quote, not just demonic, daemonic. I'm going to come to the significance of this in a second. But the heresy or the demonism, the daemonism she performs to diagnose the God terms of this world is not itself part of the binary of orthodoxy and heresy, sacred versus the profane, as terms that structure decisionism. This means that Winter's heretically demonic practice, a kind of volatile sacred, I borrow this phrase from Joseph Winters, a kind of volatile sacred as we find it being developed in Black Metamorphosis is not just anti-theological, it is anti-heretical, A-N-T-E. It's on the other side. It's anterior to our talk about heretics and orthodoxy. She's not even on that plantation field. When she says that she's practicing heresy, this must be understood poetically inasmuch as this is a practice anterior to the Christian theological binary between orthodoxy and heresy, though Blackness gets read within that racial frame as heretical, if not demonic. Because it is anterior to these decisionistic terms, Winter's heresy is actually indifferent to heresy and orthodoxy. Okay? I'm going to skip what I have here. I'm going to come to this major part that she has. How does she handle the blues? She has this quote in my section is titled, "You cannot lie in the blues." Here is what Winter finds at the heart of the blues. I want to linger with this statement. You cannot lie in the blues. Drawing on the music critic Ben Sidran, she insists you cannot lie in the blues. What could this possibly mean as a description of the blues? I contend it is not an aesthetic statement, nor is it a remark about emotional sincerity or cultural authenticity in any familiar sense. Instead, it is an epistemological statement, a claim about the kind of knowing that the blues constitutes and the kind of truth it generates. Consider what it means. Philosophy generates truth through the proposition: a knowing subject makes a claim about an object and submits it to the tribunal of reason. Theology, for the most part, generally generates truth through the doctrinal assertion. Revelation, properly interpreted by proper authorities, yields claims about God and creation and the structure of salvation. Both of these modes of knowing, the philosophical and the theological, require a fundamental split between the one who knows and the thing known, between the transcendent source of truth and the imminent situation in which that truth must land. They require, in other words, a position outside of the situation from which to judge it. A sovereign position, a deciding position. The blues refuses this. It refuses this split. But how it refuses the split matters immensely. It refuses not by making another argument, but it refuses it through a new kind of practice, by the sheer practice of being what it is. When the blues makes its truth, that truth is made in and through and from the situation itself, from the body, at the crossroads, from the community, in the juke joint, from the feelings that is itself a form of thinking. Sylvia Wynter calls it cognition through the senses. And she is careful to say that this is not irrationalism, not the abandonment of thought for feeling. In a different cognitive form, it is in a different cognitive form altogether, one that negates the twin dead ends of Western thinking. Western analytic reason evacuates the body and the senses in the name of objectivity. It needs the knower to stand above the situation in order to know it. Western irrational intuition swings to the other extreme, celebrating the body and the senses as the escape from reason's sterility. The blues doesn't do either of these things. The blues thinks through the senses. It makes what I would call, in light of Wynter's argument, a poetics again of the sacred. A knowing of what is ultimate that comes from inside the body's encounter with what it costs to be alive in conditions designed for your inhumanity. Soul, Wynter writes, is that ethic aesthetic principle by which rhythm thinks itself through the senses, end quote. Not feeling instead of thinking, rhythm thinking. The senses know. What Wynter opens in Black Metamorphosis and what will mature in the essay she titles Rethinking Aesthetics is not a diagnostic of the senses, but rather a gnostics of the senses, a gnosticism of the senses, and a gnosis in the flesh and of the soul. When Du Bois wrote that book, Souls of Black Folk, he's not playing. This is what the blues as well as jazz presuppose. Wynter writes, it is the jazz culture which therefore binds all Americans, which Americanizes, so to speak, allowing the experience of a cultural identity without the need of a metaphysical other or an ethnic enemy. Wynter continues, all can tell the truth of this experience, a collective experience of contemporary isolation, fragmentation, atomization, the blues experience. In the articulation of the experience of isolation, new social bonds are constituted, a new universal emerges. The music replaces ritual, structuring collective states of feeling experienced individually, communicated through the counter-poetics of the blues, end quote. The counter-poetics of the blues that Wynter here names goes to the heart of what I'm calling a poetics of the sacred, that is a counter to the violent imaginary of sovereignty. that there is some sort of sacred, some sort of para-religious impulse to the blues that yields an alternative form of knowing and being with each other and with the earth itself that is anterior to anything like a subject-object, rational, irrational, human-animal split. This is what comes through in Winters' invocation of Gnosticism to describe the blues. She says, against the criteria of the pervasive technological rationality of our times, the jazz culture opposes the criterion of emotional truth. Emotional truth. One must pay one's dues to sing the blues. One cannot pay them by proxy. One must know as the Gnostics knew, through the participation in experience. One has to love, as Louis Armstrong insists, to be able to play this tune, end quote. Finally, Winter says that in the music, the ethic is the aesthetic, quote unquote. The player must reach through the truth of his emotions, if his performance is to have soul, to meet with the shouts of recognition and approval from the audience. When they shout back, that's the truth. What Winter is saying here is that when we hear the blues, when we feel them, when they touch us, when they feel us feeling them back, the way a Moebius strip envelops itself in being enveloped, we enter into what I call black rapture. We are captured by, enraptured, or ravished within an anti-aesthetic knowing. Y'all didn't know all this was going on in the music, right? Now you know. Black gnosis is mysticism in the flesh. It's what Amiri Baraka, whom Cone himself to powerful effect quoted in the Spirituals and the Blues, is getting at in his treatment of free jazz as theory in sonic motion. Pianist Cecil Taylor approaches this when he describes improvisation as a metaphysical perception of new relations communicated in the music. Sun Ra goes further still, making the music itself a cosmology, a universe built, he says, in vibration. What Fred Moten will call phonic materiality names this tradition. Philosophy not so much spoken as sounded. All of this is behind Winters' statement that you can't lie in the blues. The blues cannot lie because it is not in the business of asserting from a position outside the situation. It is in the business of generating truth from within, but not the within of the lone individual, but perhaps the that within of Frantz Fanon's Black Skin, White Masks, where we dwell in and with the weight and the feel of rhythmic endurance itself. This is all a very different business from, traditionally speaking, theology, even liberation theology, even, I'm suggesting humbly, perhaps even Black liberation theology, insofar as Black liberation theology gets read as sheer theology, but perhaps not insofar as Black liberation theology is read through the blackness of Black liberation theology. The most radical inversion, okay, good, I'm gonna skip that piece, you got it. Now we get to the end. What I'm getting at here, via Winters' Black Metamorphosis meditation on the blues, is what in an essay published about a decade ago I called paratheology, but what now might be more precisely be called anti-theology. With this formulation, I want to be clear about what I mean and what I do not mean. At an institution like this one, like the great Union Theological Seminary, an institution that has rightly and at genuine cost, I might add, moved beyond the most naive forms of Christian theological certainty that carries a deep and serious commitment to a more capacious human politics. The temptation might be to hear anti-theology as just another version of secular humanism, as the cultural left's long-anticipated replacement of theology with something more palatable to contemporary sensibilities. I want to insist it is none of these. Anti-theology is not the refusal. It's not anti, it's anti. It's not the refusal of theology. Anti-theology is not anti-theology. It is the name for what was there before theology even arrived to name it. Further still, anti-theology signals what remains there, indifferent to theology's naming when theology has done its work. The blues, in this sense, is anti-theological, not because it rejects God. The blues is not anti-theological. It cannot be because it never organized itself around the question of whether God is sovereign. Instead, the blues organizes itself around a different question altogether, namely, how do those barred admittance to the category of the human, for purposes both of their exploitation and their destruction, how do they generate the resources to endure, to feel, to make something? Something communal, something sacred, something that cannot be owned. Recourse in this instance is not to the God of sovereignty. It is actually to a practice, or we might even better say, for the sake of clarity, to an incomplete, a never complete repertoire of experiments in living under conditions of duress. To engage in such practices, such beautiful experiments, is the transcendence, the imminent transcendence, the sacred of the crossroads experience itself. As an ontotheological term, transcendence actually does not work, and nor does immanence as is binary. Instead, here, the work is blue. It is a blue note on the Blue Note record label. It operates the way Prince kept bending the guitar note, the way Miles Davis bent not only the notes he played, but the silence between the notes also. The blue note sacred is a bent sacrality in as much as sacrifice or debt does not authorize it or secure it. What this means is that what I am saying is not of the order of decision, just like the blues is not. I mean to speak as Zora Neale Hurston did when she spoke of making things, as I can say here, making shit up, being involved in a signifying practice. Thus, if the blues sonically signifies the crossroads, it does so not by saying this is where you meet God, rather it is where you go when the God of all figures of sovereignty run out of road. What Winter offers then is a positive description of what is before and beneath theology when we run out of road, which is precisely where we are politically and culturally. Blues, thus, is not merely theology's negation. She calls it the model of generation, set against what she calls the model of production. The human in Western modernity, in its Christian form and in its secular liberal successor form, is defined by what it produces, what it accumulates, what it masters: reason, property, righteousness, the favor of the sovereign, the standing of the rights bearer. This is the model of production, and it organizes theology just as surely as it organizes capitalism, because they share the same cosmological grammar. The human is constituted, in this framework, by what it possesses, what it can claim, what the sovereign God and the sovereign state extends to it. The blues is something different. In the blues, life is marked not by what it possesses, but by what it generates in community with others, through the body, through reciprocal exchange, in entanglement with the earth, through what Winter calls the social body's insistence on itself against the plantation's reduction of it to a unit of labor. The cosmological grammar of the crossroads is different from all of this. One arrives not with the right credentials. At the crossroads, you arrive in the flesh, with sound, with practices transformed but not destroyed by the middle passage, metamorphosed in the passage, the very passage Charles Long theorizes in one of his theoretically rich and, dare I say, most lyrical essays, Passage in Prayer. In Passage, something as yet incomplete Something as yet incomplete, on the page, there we go. Incomplete, cosmically incompletable occurred. Sacredness itself gets remade. Okay, last move, landing the plane. Conclusion, conjuring Cone in the present. I can now say what, as I read him, Cone was reaching toward in the spirituals and the blues. With the title announced that the content couldn't quite all the way hold on to, he was reaching toward what I've been describing, drawing upon Winter. He felt the anti-theological force of the blues, even as his theological form wanted to keep converting it into data for sovereignty. He felt what Long was pressing him toward, the cosmological grammar of the Crossroads, the in-sovereign sacred, the truth that cannot be made from a position outside the situation. This is arguably what he felt even if theological form could not hold it. What Winter helps us see is where a black and blue cosmology can take us. We hear this still in Cone's work. We hear it beyond Cone's work. We hear it, in fact, quite recently. Here I refer to the film Sinners. I connected to Sinners. I'm gonna skip that right now. Preacher Boy Sammy's Confession is Cone's third book title, heard all the way down. The spirituals in the blues, I lied to you, I love the blues, the Crossroad Blues. But here is why this matters right now, tonight. What is happening in the political landscape of these United States and across the Western order is not merely political. It is political theological. Trumpism is not a political aberration. It is not an anomaly to be corrected by a better election cycle. It is the reassertion of a theological form. The sovereign who decides, the chosen people, who decides the sacred nation, who decides the redemptive violence of the righteous against the so-called unrighteous. Christian nationalism is sovereignty's theology in its most unguarded form. And what we are watching in Gaza, in the fracturing of the constitutional order here in the States, in the reassertion of imperial prerogative from Washington to Tel Aviv, is what happens when the fusion of God and power runs its logic all the way out. In this moment, what does black theology then need to be? Cone's answer, the one his first two books gave us, was a more just sovereignty, a God who decides on the side of the oppressed. That answer was necessary. It was costly, it was courageous, but it is not finally sufficient, I'm arguing, because it meets sovereignty on sovereignty's terms. Inversion is not the same as escape. The content is transformed, but the structure persists. One of the questions Afro-pessimism forces is structuralism, or the structure of modernity as a structure of anti-blackness, all there is? Are we structurally held hostage whether we like it or not? Are we fated to be structuralists? This is more than a question of Afro-pessimism, and it is more than a question of philosophy as an epistemic arrangement of anti-blackness, which it is. Hegel saw to that. It is a question of ontotheology and thus of political theology and what it counter-revolutionarily attempts to capture but cannot. Its deadly violence is in its constant work of trying to capture us. Thus, what the moment demands is not merely better political theology. What it demands is a cosmological practice before, beneath, and beyond theology's frame altogether. A practice that does not reach for the sovereign God and redirect his decision, but that orients from a place the sovereign God has never reached and cannot reach. That practice has been here all along. It has been here in the blues, in the ring shout, in the juke joint, in the conjure woman's art, in this in-sovereign sacred that the plantation produced and cannot destroy. It is what Winter theorizes and Cone was reaching toward, and the Crossroads has always embodied. To conjure Cone is to follow him all the way to where his own deepest work was pointing. Not toward a better cross, but to the crossroads. not merely to a God who decides more justly, but to a sacredness without sacrifice. This is the Crossroads. It's where Professor Cone called me right here in this neighborhood. I'm gonna give you this little autobiographical, biographical tidbit, and we're done. It has to be about 15 years ago now. I believe I was in town to give a talk at Columbia University, and I stopped by to visit Professor Cone. As I recall, he was teaching a seminar on Baldwin. He invited me to visit. I did. Later that day, Professor Cone took me out for dinner. The food was good. Of course, I was fanboying. But he said something I haven't been able to put down ever since. He asked me what I was working on. I told him that with the first book now out, I frankly was struggling. Not so much with what to say next, I was getting clearer on that, but with how to say it, how to find the form for what needs to be said. I asked him about the impact of writers like Richard Wright and James Baldwin on him. How did they help him say what he needed to say? He told me something that in retrospect I now know were the words not so much of Cone the theologian, but Jim the bluesman, Jim the conjure man. He said in that high-pitched voice that is his and nobody else's, and this is almost a quote, he said to me, "Jay, just find the beat." We were in a posh little Italian restaurant somewhere around here because we walked to it from his hotel room, from his apartment. He said again, "Jay, find the beat, the bass line, the plumb line." He pounded his fists on the table, low and quiet, like somebody tapping on a conga drum. He pounded, playing a beat, making time, the beat. It was just strong enough to make the fork jump and the spoon shake, but not loud enough that anybody else in the restaurant saw or heard him. The beat, it was just him playing for me, demonstrating for me. The beat, boom, boom. It's the beat that I remember. "Jay," he said, "there's no mistaking you or your style with anybody else's. You just need to find your beat and stay with it. Don't let it go." Those were the words not so much or not only of a theologian. They were the words, as I said, of a conjure man. He was working medicine on my soul. He was a bluesman, speaking to an emerging bluesman who was trying to get better on his instrument so he too might become an instrument. That is the Black theology, the orientation we need right now. That is what this house tonight, in his name, is being called to do. I hope that I have played this music well tonight. May we all leave here and play our instruments just a little bit better. As my preacher grandmama would say at the end of the church testimony service before getting back on the B3, she was an organist, she would say, "In these wicked and evil days." Conjuring Cone, Black theology at the Crossroads. Thank you. I'm so sorry that went as long as it did, but here we are. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
thank you. You conjured Cone. Thank you. It was extraordinary. And we're now move into that back and forth, the conversation. I'm very pleased to invite forward our amazing Associate Professor of Theology and Culture and the Director of the Religion and the Black Experience Concentration at Union, our beloved Dr. Reverend Andrea White, to lead our discussion.
Thank you to my president and to my fellow committee members for the phenomenal insight to invite the phenomenal speaker, my brother, my friend, Kameron Carter. Wow, I'm a little bit speechless. I want to actually, we have a few minutes, and what I'd like to do is open up for Q&A by privileging the voices of those who are under the age of 21. If you happen to be a sophomore in high school, I'm so delighted that we have high school students here with us this evening. And I would actually love to get the conversation started with their questions. You get to guide our thinking in this moment. So I invite you to start us off. Any questions? Okay, we've got a couple. Thank you.
I have a question. Could you explain to us what is cosmology?
Explain cosmology, the word cosmology?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you for that question. When I say cosmology, what I'm pointing to is this. We orient ourselves in the world through taking in stories. And through those stories, we develop ways of thinking about what we take to be good, what we take to be true, the kinds of directions we want to take in life. These stories do this kind of this work of shaping how we look at the world. And cosmology is one of these big old words that in its own way is talking about that. But it's not abstract. You get these stories all the time. Sometimes they're formal. You can go to, say, for example, a Christian church, and you might go to Sunday school and you might hear the story of, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And you're getting this grand story about the fall. And so these stories are ways in which we derive meaning about our world and how we want to organize and orient ourselves in the world. It's doing cosmological work in that sense. It's opening up an imagination of world. So when we talk about cosmology, we're doing it. We also do it in a much more mundane way. When you go to the movie theater and you see some given movie, say Black Panther, these fanciful stories are world organizing stories. They're communicating meaning to us about what we take the world to be about. They're a cosmology. So cosmology is not just one of these big old words we use in the academy, though it is. It's a description of the very everyday things you actually encounter, you yourself, every day, about how you're trying to build what it means to organize yourself, orient yourself in the world. That's cosmology.
Thanks for that great question to get us started. I saw another hand from a high school sophomore.
I have two questions. Am I allowed to ask both of them?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Okay, my first question is, I understand you think God is black, but do you think Jesus is black as well? If you do think Jesus is black, do you think by him being white, they would have treated him different? Do you think he would have ended up in a different place? That's my first one.
Okay.
Did everyone hear the question? If you think God is black, do you also think Jesus is black?
And if so, if you think Jesus is black, do you think by Jesus being white, he would have got treated way differently, and would he have ended up in a different place?
Okay. I'm going to rely on James Cone on one level, because I agree with him as well. James Cone said that Jesus is black. Right? He had a book, God of the Oppressed, and in that book, he said Jesus is who he was. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. He was killed outside of the city because his way of living, his care for people, his Bible says his living with and connecting with tax collectors and other sinners of the day. Remember the movie Sinners? The sinners of the day, he cavorted with them. And for that, they killed him. James Cone said that Jesus was a Palestinian Jew in that regard. But then he says Jesus is who he is right now. And he was very clear. Jesus is black, which is to say the life that Jesus lived is a life that in lived reality and lived experience is absolutely aligned with black people. And precisely in this way, Jesus is black. And he had another move that he made, but I'm going to stop there because that's answering your question. Jesus is black. But then you asked another question. Well, if Jesus is white, do you think they would have killed him like that? Would they treated him like that way? This is a very interesting question. Let me answer it this way. That's a nice thought experiment. The thought experiment is, yeah, if Jesus were white, he probably wouldn't have been treated that way. But if Jesus were white, he probably wouldn't have done the things that would have got him killed in the first place. Which then, I mean, that's why I say it's a thought experiment, because as far as we know about the Jesus of history, he lived in such a way that the way he lived got him killed. And that is already aligning him not with whiteness or its historical precursors, we might even say.
Okay, thank you. And we've got a question from our online community. We've got many, many watching virtually. And the question is, talk to us more about Prince's My Guitar Gently Weeps as anti-ANTE theology.
Yeah. If you've not seen that performance, just treat yourself. Go just YouTube it. Prince, While My Guitar Gently Weeps. And calling it a blues performance, and calling it ANTE theological, I hear the significance of the performance not in propositional declaration. The performance is working at this kind of I'm going to use Sylvia Winters' language. She says pre-languaging level. It's at the level where we are all kind of like bound together at the mode of feeling, in some sense at the mode of soul. And Prince is playing at the level where he is reaching you there. He's reaching you at the level of affect, at the level of feeling, at the level of soul, and he's tapping into what we call the original deep community by which we are common at this affective deep level. The guitar is playing right there. You have other experiences of it. If you went to see, I had this other line in here that I skipped, but if you went to see the movie Sinners, and you listen to Canton, who plays Preacher Boy, you listen to him play that guitar. You know, we all know the experience when we were in the theater. I know when I was in the theater. He played that guitar, and then the cinematography shifted, and it opened up, and this thing went celestial. You know, space-time gets broken. You have people from the future, ancestral figures from the past, disobeying national boundaries. You have people across the diaspora. Then you have Asian ancestral figures. They show up. And what is it triggered by? It's triggered by the music, the playing. The music opened up the celestial zone. It cracks. Something is happening there. And then if you watched 3 weeks ago when they did that performance in the Oscars, because I watched that and I was like, they're not going to be able to match what they did in the film. And I watched it, I was like, oh my God, Something is happening again. And what I loved about it that time was, it was, I'll use a philosophical language for a second. It was, one philosopher says, it was non-identical repetition. It repeated itself in a difference. It wasn't on the screen, but the repetition, it replayed the song, but in a difference now. And again, it opens something up right in live performance. All of that is what I'm getting after when I say when I mobilize the ante.
Okay, another question from the room. Okay.
Hi again. I'm Taylor from earlier. I feel especially grateful to have two opportunities to talk with you today. You know, I have a bunch of notes that I am trying to reference, but first of all, I want to thank you because this was really incredible. I feel like you've given me so much language to be able to move through a lot of things that I've been trying to conceptualize and articulate for a while. I have been really invested in this kind of blues epistemology for some time now, which I hear you kind of referring to throughout your work. And I'm curious, so I'm working on a thesis right now that is really invested in cosmology. I feel really strongly as well that the difference between theology and cosmology is extremely relevant and important. And, you know, I'm thinking about something that you said earlier about the blues as a cosmological practice that is before, beneath, and beyond theology. And I know that you said that you are very deeply committed to a different cosmological practice from the kind of settler colonial order that exists. I'm really curious, and this is what lends back to my thesis, about thinking alongside that before, beneath, and beyond theology, that pre-existing cosmological order. I'm curious about what things, in addition to the blues, might be informing this cosmological project that you yourself are working on. You know, I'm thinking about indigenous cosmology, specifically Wakongo cosmology, and thinking about the Kalunga line as both methodology and practice and praxis.
Did you say the Kalunga cosmogram? I thought this was, okay.
And so I also know that you're an eco-critical or environmental thinker. And so I'm wondering if there are any indigenous frameworks or inherited frameworks that you're thinking about as you are working to inform this different cosmological project. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Taylor. Thank you so much.
And if you don't mind, I just want to make sure everybody heard the question. It's about whether there are indigenous frameworks that you're working with. Yeah.
Yeah, that would connect to the cosmological. The short answer is yes. So I have the book I have coming out next year, The Afterlife of Christian Empire on Our Present Apocalypse. It's actually executing a cosmology, but it's only until the very end that I actually deploy and actually explicitly say that's what I'm doing. But if you read what I'm doing, you'll see that he's doing some sort of cosmological thing here. And I invoke the Kalunga cosmogram as one way to do it. My daughter, my oldest daughter, Kennedy, she's brilliant. I mean, and I'm not saying that just because she's my daughter. But she's like bona fide. Like, I'm in awe of her. And I was in conversation with her about, kind of various, for lack of a better way to put it, African cosmology. So she's deep inside of a lot of these things, and she introduced me to, thinking with the cosmogram, and then I did my own research on it, and it's found its way into the book. And so I'm thinking about, these are some of the ways I'm thinking about it, but now I want to connect it with indigeneity. One of the things I love about Sylvia Wynter, and one of the things that's provocative about Sylvia Wynter, is that she, along with a number of other Caribbean thinkers, she argues that the emergence of black people, of African descendant people in the Western Hemisphere, beginning in the Caribbean, she says that the black becomes indigenized into the Western Hemisphere. Now, here's the thing. It gets complicated, tricky, real quick, because we've been schooled to think the word indigenous as a race term and then assign it to people that we say are native people to here. And what we have to reckon with is, actually, when we make that move, let's just know that we're inside the race logic. We've accepted the race logic, took a piece of it and deployed it with respect. What Winter does is she says, wait a minute, when black people show up here, they can't just like act like they're bringing, traditions and so forth from Africa, though they are, but they're metamorphosed, they're changed, because those traditions aren't frozen. So when they cross the Middle Passage and land in the New World, she says a new type of indigenization has happened. She used the word as indigenous. It stumbled me for the longest. Like, why ain't she saying indigenous? I know she knows about indigenous people. But then it dawned on me what she's saying. She was pointing to the process of what it means to actually engage in a new type of rootage, but a rootage that is not the rootage of claiming property. Is there a rootage that is actually a diasporic rootage? It is a rootage in movement rather than a rootage of property claim. And she calls this process one metamorphosis in the book, but when you get inside the book, she starts to deploy the term indigenization. And what I'm doing is trying to take that and think indigeneity, indigenization, more capaciously, which is to say, beyond racial category. You remember Victor Anderson's book, right? Beyond Ontological Blackness. And Victor has this phrase in there. I remember when I encountered the phrase, it struck me like a force, and I spent so much time trying to get my head around what he meant. And he has this phrase in Beyond Ontological Blackness where Victor says, we have to, in some sense, move past the blackness that whiteness created. The blackness, now I'm going to adapt it. We have to think indigeneity beyond the indigeneity that the racial order racially produces to frame and contain the people they name indigenous. So indigeneity is now moving in all kinds of ways for me. And I am thinking, therefore, cosmologically, with all types of newly indigenized people, given the contact and the conquest that so many of us have faced, and we've now had to reorient ourselves with respect to each other and with respect to the earth. I don't know if that helps.
It absolutely does. Thank you.
Thank you. And here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to call on Brother West, and then what I'd like to do is, so that you have the benefit of hearing what you've conjured for us and provoked, I would like to I have a series of questions, but we have negative 10 minutes to answer them. But I'd like to put the questions in this space after you answer Brother West. And so we'll maybe close with just a final word before I pass it off to President Jones. Okay.
No, we can go with your questions, my dear sister. We can go with your questions.
Oh, we want to hear your question.
Well, one, I just want to thank my dear brother Jay, because it was already a consecrated space here with the spirit of our dear brother James Howell Cone, who I know for over 50 years. And I'm in his office. I refuse to take his name off the door. So you still see Mr. Cone, then you got little Brother West. I'm just Brother West right under Mr. Cone. He was in that office for 50 years. Wow. And you did him so much justice, though, brother. You put a smile on his face, and that's one of the highest standards one can have, not just theologically and philosophically, but as a human being with integrity, honesty, decency, and always mustering the capacity to tell the truth and give love. But my question is this. I wonder whether your juxtaposition of the cross and the crossroads needs to be called into question.
Needs to be called into question.
Absolutely. Which is to say, that if by the cross we mean unarmed truth, which is fleshified on that cross, it has to do with allowing suffering to speak, and unapologetic love, which is fleshified on that cross, which means mustering the courage to empty yourself to serve others who are less off than you. If we understand the cross in that way, it's already on the crossroads. It's Robert Johnson and Mahalia Jackson together. Because everywhere you go on any road, you're going to have to come to terms sooner or later with how deep the love that you have actually is and how willing you are to tell the truth and to live truth in the resistance to the suffering that that truth is connected to. So no matter what road you find yourself, what Bronx, what part of town the young folk from? From the Bronx, from Manhattan? You from Manhattan? You got crosses there, you got catastrophes, you got suffering, you got hurt, you got pain. And you need love, you need courage, you need integrity. So if in fact every crossroad has a cross and every cross is on the crossroads, then your profound formulation, your deep understanding, which is in part a critique of Cone with Dolores and the others, Dolores Williams and the others, but Cone's still coming back to say, but no, you're going to be bearing the cross even on your crossroad. Because everybody got a cross to bear in some way. And in the end, it's not going to be just a matter of knowledge and epistemology. It's going to be a way of life. Because the love supreme is not about the primacy of epistemology. It's about a way of life. How would you respond to that? Because I think Brother Cone would want somebody to defend that cross in relation to the crossroads. And I'm the cracked vessel that's trying to do it right now.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. When I saw your hand go up, I was like, oh, shit.
Because it was what you did was masterful.
But for real, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, I think what I would say is, I appreciate, I deeply appreciate what's being said here, and deeply appreciate James Cone's position on this. What I was trying to do, even in the way I was doing this, I was trying to find a way to sort of, in some sense, surface that if the cross is going to do any kind of serious work, it's going to have to be poeticized through the crossroads, right? But I think that gesture, as a gesture, which I would read Cone is trying to do, that's something on the far side of what theology as a discursive practice does. That's a blues move. As such, it's not a theological move. I think that the force of Dolores Williams' critique is holding tenaciously to the theological architecture of the cross, what it's been theologically meant to do. And if you just sort of say, okay, don't read it through the blues, but let's just read it through what its theological history is about, right? Let's go to Anselm of Canterbury, and let's unpack what that move does, what it historically did. I think her argument on that level I just read it as unassailable. I think she's right. But to your point, and through you, Cone, I would say that what Cone in effect was, this is an interpretive move, okay? I am interpreting, okay? My interpretive move vis-a-vis Cone is to say, the only way you're gonna be able to hold on to the cross then, given what Dolores Williams is saying, and I think she's on such solid ground, I mean, is you're gonna have to subject the cross to a crossroads poetics so that it can do the work you're saying and you want it to do, for which I have no problem. Because I think that I think that this is one of the crucial ways you could understand a phenomenon called Black Christianity, writ large. That it's a poetic practice. That's ultimately what it is, and which is it's a blues practice. Depending on who you talk to, people say, man, Jay ain't Christian no more. I mean, whatever. I maintain being my grandmother's grandson. For me, that's the standard. I am my grandmother's grandson because that woman was a blues poet, preacher. When she got behind that B3, she was a blues poet player. When she testified in church, she was a blues woman. That's what she's doing. And a lot of theological language might be mobilized, but like Baraka said, it's the same words, but they doing a very different thing. And it's not to say we can't even draw upon certain theological vocabularies to do some interpretive work. Surely we can. I'm just pointing out the moment where, Nate Mackey has this phrase, he gets it, talking about cosmology and mythology, he gets it from the Dogon people of West Africa. He calls it, they have an idea called the creaking of the word. Pushing our language to the point where it begins to creak under the weight of what we're trying to get it to do, but it wasn't built to do. And so when, this comes back to the other question, when Prince takes that guitar, I taught myself guitar, so I'm no virtuoso by any stretch, but I taught myself guitar. I played trumpet, baritone horn. But one of the things I noticed when I was learning guitar, I see it what Prince does. I see it with so many musicians. They put their finger on the string and they gotta bend the string to make the string that if you just pluck it on its own terms, it can't make that sound. So the assistance of the finger to bend it, and when you watch Prince, it's a virtuoso performance. You can see him, he's bending it, he's turning, he even turns the instrument. You gotta make the instrument turn, he's bending it. And by the time he's done, once he's done everything he's done, he throws the instrument away. It's done its job. When black meets Christianity, when the word black, not just as an adjective, but as a phenomenon of blackness, irreducible to the blackness that whiteness created, when that black meets the word theology, it's not just an adjective only, it fundamentally disorients the thing it's linked to. Theology now is creaking under the weight of the blackness that is doing a guitar bending on its sound. You get what I'm saying? God is not God, it's God, right? The language bends. When the preacher gets up there and we have that oral sonic singing tradition, it's something, it's performative, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to like valorize this and romanticize it. I mean, we can criticize this, and I have criticisms, believe me. But there's something at play when the singing precedes the preaching in a kind of classical missionary Baptist church tradition. And you get the choir, and you get the musicians, and they're playing. In some sense, that musical sensibility, that blues sensibility that's in the congregation, it is, in a certain sense, like a jazz performance. It's authorizing the preacher to be the sonic mouthpiece of the congregation, of the gathering. Right? And what you're hearing is you're hearing the sound bending. Normative language won't work. It goes into a hum, like the blues hum. There's something bigger than what the normative categories of theology can say about that. Why? Because they're not built to say it. They're not built for it.
Professor Dorian, we're going to have to play some Prince in our cone class next week. I'm actually going to change my plans here because now we have negative 20 minutes, and I want to conjure an ellipsis, a numerical gap, a haunting fissure a la Toni Morrison and Fred Moten and all the things. And just thank you for your brilliant, brilliant lecture and time with us. And I'm going to pass it back to President Jones.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jay Cameron. Wow. And we have a reception at the back, and have a good evening and continue the conversation. So, thank you.